interrupt this program to bring you Courage, the Cowardly Dog Month.
Whole month of Courage, the Cowardly Dog. First appearing in 1996, it was picked up by Cartoon Network, who work in the middle of Burbank, and directed by cartoonist John Dilworth. Though many years have passed since the original air date, it's now time for Zach Morris to celebrate this great show.
Well, old sport, what do you think? Neat. Hey guys, Zach Morris here, and welcome back to Courage Month. So today's episodes we're going to be reviewing are The Quilting Club and Swindle and Win. So let's get into both of those. Okay, so this episode, The Quilting Club, is actually kind of interesting, and it's also literally the darkest episode in the show because it's usually the show has very upbeat, vibrant colors, but here not so much. It is quite literally the darkest episode, not like figuratively, like it has some dark themes, although because that covers basically the whole series. But rather, this episode is just thematically very dark. It's just all the colors are very not very bright and not very colorful. But in any case, this episode opens up with Eustace, Muriel, and Courage visiting a quilting shop, which they actually walk into. Muriel is actually shopping for quilts and actually shopping for more patchwork and quilting supplies. Meanwhile, Eustace is having trouble with being in the quilting club, being in the actual quilt building, because as it turns out, he has a very horrible dust allergy, and the quilts apparently haven't been dusted in a while, so he's constantly coughing and sneezing on everything, and eventually he decides to just give up and goes to go wait in the car while Eustace and Courage actually go and shop. So to this point, at which point Courage is actually they're actually walking through the store. Courage is currently playing with Muriel's loose string and actually playing cat's cradle with it, and also tries to floss his teeth with it at one point, but it just winds up pulling his teeth out, which he has to go then chase down and pick back up. Muriel doesn't even notice this, by the way. She just keeps walking. But he eventually does catch up and put his teeth back in his mouth, and then continues to keep flossing with the piece of string. At which point Muriel actually goes to the counter, hoping she can actually find the materials that she's actually looking for, because she's very interested in actually joining the quilting club. So she rings the bell, wondering if anybody's there. At which point a pair of conjoined sisters called the Stitch Sisters, who take turns introducing themselves individually to Muriel. They introduce themselves as Elisa and Eliza Stitch, who are, as I mentioned, conjoined twins. They introduce each other and ask how they can help. At which point Muriel expresses her interest in actually joining the quilting club, since she saw the sign and would like to know how to actually join. So they do offer her a position on the club, but they also mention that they're very selective in new members and that they hope that she'll actually be able to fit in and join the club. And she does point out that she would like to belong, and actually points out that she has been working on some stitching of her own. She actually has her stitching materials with her, and she actually pulls out a patch that she's been working on for a memory quilt that she's been making for Eustace. Long story short, she's been making a memory quilt and has one of the patches done already, so she decides to pull it out and show the Stitch Sisters, but they kind of reject her, pointing out that they only accept new memories, and that if she wants to join the club, she'll have to make something new. If they want to join the quilt, and then Lisa corrects Eliza, saying that she'll join the quilt club, which Courage notes is sinister, and also it's not helped in the slightest by the fact that here's the quilt that they have on the counter making a growling noise, which concerns Courage a little bit, but he's not entirely sure what to make out of it yet. But in case Muriel immediately gets to work making something new and starts and actually puts all of her memory quilting supplies in a box. And proceeds to start looking through her materials to see if she can make something new out of them. Courage actually kind of just again playing with the string and actually just kind of just flossing a little bit with it, and he also tangles himself up in the string at this point as well. But in any case, Eustace winds up getting so sick that he actually winds up being bedridden, and Muriel is too busy working on her quilting supplies, so Courage winds up taking care of him for the majority of this episode. So yeah, and that's just a recurring thing throughout this episode. Muriel continues to create more and more things to actually prove that she deserves to join the quilting club, but in as she goes on, she gets increasingly obsessed with it. And meanwhile, Courage winds up taking up more and more of her duties as she becomes more and more obsessed with making quilting things. So it starts off pretty tame with Muriel actually coming in with a handmade chair that she made with kind of a handmade chair cover, I think, that she made with a peacock design in it. And she initially is a little unsure about whether or not she wants to join the club. And then the quilt just lets out a very obvious no. So the Stitch Sisters tell her that she'll need to do better than that to actually join the quilting club. So she goes back into the basement again, and this time she keeps working on it. This time she actually makes a cover for Eustace's truck. At least I think so. We never actually see what the vehicle looks like, but there is indeed a vehicle underneath the quilts. That's the only vehicle that's ever been shown. So I'm assuming it's a handmade cover for Eustace's truck. But again, when the Stitch Sisters asked her if she wants to join she merely responds that she'll have to run it by Eustace again, and again the quilt says no, and the Stitch Sisters reject her and joining into the club. So she goes back to work again. This time, by this point, she is completely 100% obsessed with actually joining the quilting club, to the point where Eustace comes down to her complaining about how she hasn't been around to take care of him, and she merely responds by ripping off his pajama top to make into new quilting material. So she doesn't even notice he's there at all, and then just continues to go down in the basement and make something that'll impress the Stitch Sisters again. And then by the time she comes back to the shop, she has made a full-on giant quilt that also functions as a football field. Case in point, she then demonstrates the point by having a bunch of football players actually play on the makeshift field that she's made. And the Stitch Sisters are very impressed about her dedication and ask her how much she wants to join the club again. At which point she merely responds that she has no idea who her family is anymore, because obviously she's been working feverishly and has since forgotten her family in pursuit of joining the quilting club. So yeah, she's basically becomes obsessed with joining the club at this point, and at which point the quilt finally agrees that she can join, and the Sisters formally welcome her into the club and tell her that her initiation will be that night. So Muriel then proceeds to return home and get ready for her initiation. With Courage just becoming a little bit concerned, because obviously she's been working very feverishly on the quilts this whole time and hasn't really spent time with her family at all. She's just been so obsessed with building this quilt and actually joining the quilting club that she's completely neglected her family. At which point the Stitch Sisters then proceed to knock on the back door, and Muriel proceeds to let them in. And the Stitch Sisters immediately remark that it's time for her initiation, and Muriel is a little confused at first, pointing out that she doesn't see any of the other quilting members. But the Stitch Sisters merely respond that she'll actually see them again when they actually complete her initiation. At which point they tell her to quilt a specific symbol into a piece of quilting material that they've handed her, and that once her initiation is complete, she'll be able to join the quilting club. And the quilting symbol itself kind of looks like a pincushion, kind of sort of. It looks like half a pincushion with the needle sticking out of it, but Courage is a little skeptical about the symbol and decides to take a picture of it and bring it upstairs to the computer to analyze. And the computer then proceeds to explain to him the history of the symbol, about how it's a symbol meaning everlasting peace, and everlasting life, and that it has existed since ancient times. And then proceeds to show him a PowerPoint presentation about how it actually works. And Courage, to his horror, discovers that the Stitch Sisters are actually hundreds of thousands of years old through that. He actually discovers that throughout all of the historical pictures that the computer decides to show him regarding the symbol, that the Stitch Sisters have been in every single one that has appeared on his screen. And Courage becomes concerned because they're currently in his house, so he runs downstairs to try and save Muriel. But it's too late, because now that Muriel has actually finished her symbol, the Stitch Sisters are able to actually stitch that into the quilt, and then by extension, her. So by the time Courage actually comes down, Muriel has actually become one with the quilt, and no amount of pleading with her and trying to free her from the quilt is actually going to save her. So at which point the Stitch Sisters explained how that now that she's part of the quilt, that she'll never remember him again or never remember her family again, and there's nothing he can really do about it. And then they proceed to cackle maniacally. So at which point Courage realizes he needs to actually figure out a way to remind Muriel of who he is, and who her husband is, and proceeds to run down the basement to look for her memory quilting supplies, since he remembers that was what she was working on before all of this madness happened. And while he's initially has a little bit of trouble since everything is now covered in broken quilting fabric, he does eventually find her quilting supplies and actually decides to hide in the box and bring it upstairs. At which point Muriel has since fully become a part of the quilt and now has her own patch on the quilt. At which point Courage then proceeds to hide in the box and bring it upstairs with the Stitch Sisters remarking that Muriel isn't going to need that supplies anymore and that they should probably throw it out and get rid of it. But when they go to reach for the box, Courage ambushes them and ties them up with a piece of yarn to actually immobilize them, and then he throws them in Eustace's chair to keep them immobilized for a bit. At which point he pulls out Eustace's quilting patch and proceeds to actually stitch it into the quilt, which causes Muriel's memories to slowly come back a little bit. But the Stitch Sisters and by extension the quilt itself actually reject this new addition to the quilt, and the Stitch Sisters then proceed to free themselves and try to stop Courage, but Courage takes it one step further by ripping off parts of his own fur and then proceeding to patch that into the quilt as well. Which then causes Muriel's memories of her family to fully come back, and she's able to pop out of the quilt. And the quilt having now been defeated, and having finally figured out how to defeat the quilt, it then proceeds to freak out and explode and fall to pieces, while the Stitch Sisters are transformed into a patch of quilt themselves. At which point the Quilting Club is actually set free from the quilt and are no longer trapped within it. And Muriel is initially very happy because now she has a bunch of gal pals to actually hang out with, and several ones throughout ancient history at that. And proceeds to offer them some tea and so that they can actually work on some quilting techniques together. But then Eustace barges in, his nose now completely stuffed up and running, and the Quilting Club members actually flee for the hills. At which point Eustace is about to sneeze, and Courage, deciding to add one last insult to injury to the Quilt Sisters, actually hands the patch that they were trapped in to Eustace to use as a tissue, much to their chagrin, since they're currently very much alive and very much trapped within the quilt. So yeah, they in addition to that, they wind up not only being defeated but also sneezed on by Eustace. So yeah, this episode is interesting for a number of reasons. First and foremost is that it's a very off tone for what the series usually does. Usually the series are depicted as having very bright and cheerful colors, but not the case here. And also there's an organ-like funeral march that plays in the background of this episode that is exclusive to this episode, as far as I know, according to my research after watching the episode. But yeah, this episode kind of just showcases. Is just kind of very off-brand, but it is very interesting in that Muriel kind of takes her obsession way too far to the point where she forgets her family, and Courage has to remind her what's important: family. So yeah, this episode is just kind of interesting about how, yes, it's good to have hobbies, but when you become obsessed with them and start neglecting your own family, that's when things become a problem. Case in point, Muriel got so obsessed with her work that she literally turned into a quilt. So, and granted, the Stitch Sisters kind of facilitated that by kind of egging her on, and just so that they can make her into the part of the quilt itself. But that is beside the point. This episode is just about getting too into your hobbies to the point where you start forgetting who your family is and just kind of become obsessed with it. But in any case, that's my review of the Quilting Club. Onward to the next review. Okay, so this episode, Swindling Wind, is actually very interesting, and that is about the core premise of it, and the core message behind it is, don't cheat others out of their due. Basically, that's what the story is. The episode starts off with Eustace, Muriel, and Courage actually going to a bazaar where Muriel is actually picking up things to actually give. She's actually looking through things to actually give Eustace for an anniversary gift, since their anniversary is apparently coming up, according to the episode. And Muriel is looking through some stuff. Courage actually winds up picking up a pinwheel and starts playing with it, but he winds up making it go too fast, and his ears wind up getting stuck in it. But Muriel merely remarks that she's having so much fun at the bazaar that she can barely feel the wood tick on her toe. At which point she goes to take a step and actually feels him gnawing on her. So she asks Courage to actually do the honors and help deal with the tick for temporarily. So what Courage actually winds up doing is he takes off her foot, notices the tick is there, and then proceeds to drop some tick repellent on it, which causes it to become dreary, and Muriel then proceeds to put her boot back on and stomp down real hard, which winds up disorienting the tick, but not really killing it, since obviously the tick is still very much there by the end of the episode. I'm just spoiling it now. The tick doesn't really go away. But in any case, they continue going shopping to go find Eustace, and Eustace has since forgotten that he's supposed to be there looking for an anniversary gift. And in actuality, what he's doing is he's looking for some hubcaps for his truck, because he wants to take care of his truck as much as he does his wife. But he winds up stammering a little bit when Muriel comes along and asks him how his anniversary shopping is going, pointing out that she's found the perfect anniversary gift for him. And Eustace kind of covers for himself because he realizes he doesn't have anything. So he winds up giving her the hubcap as a hat, and they keep going on their merry way shopping. At which point they wind up in front of Shirley's stall, who is currently selling a series of artifacts sitting on her desk. And Shirley is just selling a whole bunch of things and giving a whole bunch of other things that are for sale. And Eustace Eustace and Muriel note that the necklace looks kind of pretty. And actually finds a blue necklace with a heart shape on it. So Eustace decides to get it for her, which Shirley remarks is $5. And obviously, Eustace is a bit of a cheapskate, and doesn't want to pay for the $5. So he decides instead to actually do something to actually try and find another way to actually pay for it. Initially, he offers Shirley the Courage, but Courage just winds up running off before he can actually be sold as legal tender, and then also winds up running into a bear trap and starts playing with it, which he winds up getting his tongue stuck in. So he winds up being a little indisposed for the rest of that segment. At which point Eustace decides instead to actually give her the deed to his oil well, which she agrees to, and is more than happy to accept and take, and as legal tender. And with that, she then proceeds to give Eustace the necklace, who then proceeds to give it to Muriel, and they leave and get ready to go back to their truck and back home. However, and meanwhile, Courage is still playing around with the bear trap, which winds up becoming a false set of teeth in his mouth, which is a kind of a little funny gag, but well, as he's there, he actually overhears Shirley actually figuring out that it is not indeed a deed to an oil well, but rather to Eustace's oil bill, which he then proceeded to foot onto her. So in a rage, she then proceeds to pull out a bellows and starts summoning a curse. She actually summons a curse to actually curse Muriel and Eustace for swindling her, because she's angry about the fact that she got swindled out of a necklace. So she then proceeds to put a curse on them where they'll start swindling themselves instead of each other, and each other instead of other people. So, and Courage, realizing that the curse is very much a real thing because from her past experience, then proceeds to run back to the truck and hides in the bed to actually witness the whole thing, and even tries to knock on the back window to actually get them to open up and find out about the curse, but neither of them are really paying attention, and are just kind of focusing on the fact, and they're just kind of listening to the radio, and Muriel is just kind of admiring her new gift. At which point, the curse eventually catches up to them and proceeds to fill the cabin of Eustace's truck. Then back home, the curse takes full effect. They sit down for dinner, and as Eustace and Muriel are about to sit down and have dessert, the curse takes effect on Muriel, and she decides to swindle Eustace out of his dessert. The way she does this is by doing that cup game, the one where you shuffle the 3 cups and then one of them has the prize underneath. That one. She rigs it so that none of the little trays are actually the correct one, and she winds up swindling Eustace out of his dessert that way, which upsets Eustace, and he becomes angry that she swindled him out of his dessert. But then the curse proceeds to affect him, and he decides to actually swindle her by making her drink so much tea that she has to use the bathroom, and then forcing her to pay with her money and her rocking chair. So what he does is he gives her so much tea, she drinks it, and then when he makes a big show of going to go get her some more tea, when in actuality, he set up a toll booth in front of the bathroom and is forcing her to pay to get into the bathroom. So she then proceeds to retaliate by playing a crooked dice game where she makes a big play of Courage winning 6 peanuts in the game. With Eustace then proceeding to bet his TV, and he winds up getting a loaded dice that just says loser on it, so he loses his TV that way. But then later, while Muriel is actually trying to clean the TV, Eustace pretends to be a sheep. He actually rigs a stuffed sheep with a microphone and a speaker, and proceeds to trick Muriel into dragging her to her fridge and a bunch of other stuff out onto the front porch because she thinks it's going to rain. And then when he once again tells her as the sheep to go inside and get her umbrella, she leaves and lets all the stuff, and he takes all of her stuff from her before she can even figure out what's going on. So yeah, and Courage is the one who actually does figure out what's going on with the sheep, but he doesn't fully understand what's going on, and when Muriel comes out demanding to know where her stuff is, he has no idea what to actually answer to her. But in case, at this point, Muriel, now that Eustace has all of her stuff, Muriel then proceeds to come out as a bit of a one-man band with a xylophone, a pair of cymbals, and a drum, and then proceeds to make such a loud racket that Eustace is forced to throw some of his stuff at her to actually get her to quiet down and stop giving him a headache, which she expertly dodges, and they all wind up hitting Courage instead. At which point Courage decides to break it up and decides that enough is enough, and tries to stop Muriel by grabbing onto her and trying to shake her out of it and try to snap her out of it, but he merely gets hit by something else, which causes which winds up causing the necklace that she was wearing to fall off, and Courage winds up holding it. At which point Courage remembers what actually happened that caused the curse in the first place, so he decides to actually bring the necklace back to Shirley and demand that she undo the curse. But Shirley isn't really interested in doing that, mainly because, as she points out, actually bringing back the thing that they got swindled out of isn't going to be enough to undo the curse. And then to demonstrate, she actually points out that this isn't the first curse she's actually put on somebody today, revealing that she also cursed a couple who apparently had a bunch of delicious food, and she wanted some, so she asked them for some, and they were too greedy to give her any of the actual good stuff, so they gave her some rotten bananas. So in retaliation, she turned their heads into bananas. Which she does point out is what they deserved. So, because as swindling begets swindling, she points out that greediness begets banana heads. But then she notes that the couple, despite their suffering, still have one another. And are actually decided to actually partake in their suffering voluntarily to actually kind of ease the burden on each other, which moves Shirley to tears, and she then proceeds to undo the curse, which Courage realizes he can actually use to his advantage, and with that, he proceeds to run back home and actually try and stop Eustace and Muriel from swindling one another, who have since swindled each other out of so much stuff that now they're currently wearing a box and a barrel to actually cover up their stuff, because now they've literally been swindled out of the clothes on their backs and there's not much left they can do. So Courage, realizing he needs to actually find a way to actually get Eustace to take on Muriel's suffering voluntarily, remembers that she has a wood tick on her toe, and shows the tick to Eustace, who then realizes that she does indeed have something that he doesn't have, and decides to actually quote unquote swindle her out of her toe tick, which winds up curing her pain, and Eustace winds up taking it on voluntarily due to the curse. At which point Courage kind of waves to Shirley through her magic ball, and she realizes that Eustace has indeed learned how to care for somebody else other than himself, and has actually used the fact that has actually quote unquote swindle her out of her pain. So she decides to actually undo the curse for both of them and returns them to everything back to normal. At which point everything does go back to normal. Muriel is currently sitting on her rocking chair with Courage, and she merely remarks that's the important lesson that they need to take away from today's episode and today's lesson. That if you swindle people, sooner or later you'll get swindled yourself. And then to nail the point home, Eustace and the Tick then proceed to play a crooked card game up against one another. Eustace winds up getting with the object of the game being that if Eustace wins a game of poker, the Tick has to leave, whereas the Tick gets to move up to Eustace's earlobe if he wins. And the joke is that it is indeed a crooked card game because Eustace winds up pulling 5 aces and the Tick winds up pulling 6, even though there are only 4 aces in any particular deck of cards. So yeah, you can kind of see. I think you can kind of get the joke that they wind up swindling each other at the very end, and Eustace tries to swindle the Tick to get rid of him, but the Tick is smart and actually swindles him back. So yeah, that's the main thing of this episode. To try to pay everybody their due because if you cheat people, sooner or later somebody is going to come along and cheat you. So that is the main moral of this episode, and I kind of like it for that. But in any case, that is my review of Courage the Cowardly Dog. What did you guys think? Let's get discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out, and obviously it gives you guys access to a bunch of good perks that I'm saying thanks. And it does help me make projects like this. So if you guys want to actually see more projects like this, then be sure to go check those out down in the description. And also, if you want to see more content from me, there's actually 2 ways you can do that. One is by checking out my Twitch down in the description. It does help me support me, and I am streaming a bunch of horror games to go along with Courage Month, and we're also closing in on the grand finale of Courage Month. So if you guys will actually want to see that, by all means, go follow me over there, and make sure you actually come to see the live stream live, because we're actually going to be watching the grand finale of this, which is going to be the crossover movie with Scooby-Doo. So be sure to go check that out. And also, finally, if you want to see more content from me other than that, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is the video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But regardless of whether or not you do any of those things, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!